Just sign the papers, old man. It's not like you're using the house anyway, rattling around in that little room of yours. Think of it as your contribution. The only one you've made in years. The words slithered out of my son-in-law, Mark, his voice a slick blend of feigned patience and raw greed. He thought I couldn't hear him from the kitchen, where he stood with my daughter, Sarah. He thought my hearing was as faded as the photograph of my late wife, Martha, that I kept on my nightstand. But I heard every syllable. I heard the casual cruelty, the dismissive wave of his hand I could picture so clearly. I heard my daughter's silence, a quiet, shattering testament to her complicity. In that moment, listening to them plot to take the very roof from over my head, the home I'd bought for them, a switch flipped within me. The grief and loneliness that had been my constant companions since Martha passed were burned away by a sudden, cold fire. They saw a frail, useless old man. They were about to learn how dangerously they had misjudged me. They wanted my house. They wanted my signature. What they would get, in the end, was a lesson. A final, meticulously crafted lesson from the cheap, old man in the guest room. My life has been one of quiet accumulation, not of dollars, but of habits. The habit of rising before the sun. The habit of fixing what is broken instead of replacing it. The habit of seeing value where others see waste. Mark called it being cheap. He'd hold up my darn socks at family dinners as if they were a comedy prop. Look at this, he'd boom, his laughter filling the dining room that was paid for with my sweat. Arthur's still living in the Great Depression. Someone tell him the war is over. Sarah would offer a weak, pained smile, her eyes pleading with me not to react. And I never did. I would just nod, a small, tight smile on my own face, and let him have his moment. What he never understood, what neither of them ever understood, was that my frugality wasn't born of poverty. It was born of purpose. I remember the day Sarah was born. Holding her tiny, perfect form in my arms, I felt a sense of responsibility so profound it was terrifying. Martha and I weren't wealthy people. I was a carpenter, a craftsman. I worked with my hands, turning raw wood into things of beauty and function. It was honest work, but it didn't come with stock options or golden parachutes. Every dollar I earned was a testament to the skill in my hands and the strength in my back. From that first day, I held Sarah. A portion of every single paycheck, no matter how small, was set aside. It was for her education, for her future, for a safety net I never had. While other men my age were buying new cars and fancy gadgets, I was patching my old truck and poring over investment pamphlets at the public library. I learned about compound interest, about mutual funds, about the slow, steady, unglamorous path to real security. It was a secret language of patience, a disciplined Mark, with his leased BMW and his obsession with brand names, could never comprehend. He saw my patched clothes and assumed I was destitute. He saw my simple meals and assumed I was struggling. He never once considered that my choices were just that, choices. He couldn't fathom a world where a man would willingly deny himself small luxuries for a larger goal. His entire philosophy was built on the shaky foundation of appearance. The appearance of wealth was more important than the reality of it. When he and Sarah announced their engagement, I saw the way he looked at me and my modest home with a faint, almost imperceptible sneer. He was sizing me up, calculating my worth, and finding me wanting. I saw the hunger in his eyes, but I mistakenly believed Sarah's love for me would temper it. A father's foolish hope. For their wedding, they wanted the best of everything. A venue that cost more than my first car. A dress that could have fed a family for a year. I didn't argue. I liquidated a portion of the portfolio I had spent 30 years building and wrote the check. Sarah cried, thanking me, telling me I was the best father in the world. Mark clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a claim of ownership than one of affection. Knew you had it in you, Art, he'd said, a conspiratorial wink in his eye. He didn't see a gift of love. He saw confirmation of a hidden stash he was now entitled to. That should have been my final warning. A year later, they wanted a house. A big one, in a neighborhood with manicured lawns and an oppressive homeowners association. They didn't have the down payment, of course. Mark's salary as a mid-level marketing manager was mostly consumed by the lease on his car and his wardrobe. So they came to me. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where Sarah had done her homework as a little girl. They laid out the brochures, their faces glowing with desire. "It's an investment, Dad," Sarah had said, echoing a line I was sure Mark had coached her on. "We just need a little help to get started." Mark leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Think of it, Arthur. A place for you too. You could have the guest room. No more worrying about keeping up this old place." The manipulation was so blatant, so transparent. They were framing my displacement as a favor to me. But I looked at my daughter, at the hope in her eyes, and my resolve crumbled. I sold my home, the place where I had raised my child, where every corner held a memory of Martha. I sold my workshop, the sanctuary where I created and dreamed, and the tools my own father had passed down to me. I took all that money, the sum of my life's physical footprint, and I gave it to them for their down payment. I signed the papers that made them the owners of a beautiful house I would never truly be able to call home. The one condition I insisted upon, a detail I had my own lawyer draft into a separate, private agreement, was that I retained a silent, controlling interest in the property until my death. Sarah and Mark signed it without a second thought, their eyes glazed over by the prospect of their new life. They never read the fine print. People like Mark never do. They are too consumed by the prize to inspect the path leading to it. My life in their house became a study in diminishment. I was relegated to a small, sterile room at the back of the house, my world shrinking to the size of a queen bed and a small television. My presence was an inconvenience, a piece of old furniture that no longer matched the decor. Mark's insults became a daily ritual, as common as his morning coffee. He'd complain about the smell of the liniment I used for my arthritis. He'd mock the old-fashioned detective shows I watched. He'd make comments under his breath about me being a freeloader, a drain on their resources, conveniently forgetting the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had poured into their laps. Each barb was a small cut, and over the years, I had bled 1,000 times. Sarah, my Sarah, stood by and watched. Sometimes she would say, "Mark, be nice," but her voice lacked conviction. It was the protest of a hostage, not a defender. She had made her choice, siding with the lifestyle he provided over the father who had provided for her. The final, unforgivable incident happened about a year before the end. I had a small, hand-carved music box that I had made for Martha on our first anniversary. It played her favorite tune, a simple, sweet melody. It was my most treasured possession, the last tangible piece of her I had left. One afternoon, I came back to my room to find it gone from my nightstand. I searched everywhere, a growing panic tightening in my chest. When I asked Sarah about it, she looked nervous. "I don't know, Dad. Maybe you misplaced it, but I knew I hadn't." Later that evening, I overheard Mark in the garage, laughing on the phone with one of his friends. "Yeah, I finally tossed it," he said. "Creepy old thing, playing that tinny music all the time. The old man was making a fuss, but he'll forget about it. He forgets everything these days." He hadn't just thrown away a music box. He had thrown away my heart. He had discarded my love for my wife as if it were trash. And my daughter had let him. That was the night I called my lawyer, a man I had known for 40 years, a man as patient and meticulous as I was. "Walter," I said, my voice steady and cold. "It's time. I want to revise my will. And I want to make it ironclad." The work began in earnest. For the next year, as my body grew weaker, my purpose grew stronger. I met with Walter weekly. We structured my estate with the precision of a master watchmaker. I liquidated assets Mark never knew existed, stocks in tech companies I'd invested in decades ago, a small parcel of land that had become immensely valuable, the proceeds from the sale of my rare coin collection. The numbers grew to a sum that would have made Mark's head spin. He saw a cheap old man. The world saw a savvy, disciplined investor. The irony was a source of dark, private satisfaction. I wrote my final statement, not as a will, but as a letter, a story, my story. I poured all the pain, all the love, all the disappointment, and all the calculated fury onto those pages. Every word was chosen with care. every sentence honed to a razor's edge. I detailed every sacrifice, every insult, every quiet moment of heartbreak. It was the last thing I would ever build, and it was designed to be my masterpiece, a flawless structure of justice and consequence. As I signed the final documents with Walter, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The pain in my chest, a constant companion for months, seemed to ease. I had done what I needed to do. I had settled my accounts. My legacy would not be one of weakness and victimhood. It would be a lesson delivered from beyond the grave, a lesson on the true meaning of wealth. I went home to that sterile guest room, lay down on the bed, and closed my eyes, ready for the final act to begin without me. The air in Walter's conference room was thick with a cloying mixture of cheap perfume and barely concealed avarice. I had pictured this scene 100 times in my final year. Sarah sat dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, a performance of grief that was perhaps not entirely feigned. She had lost her father, after all, but the grief was tainted, clouded by the anticipation of inheritance. Beside her, Mark was practically vibrating with impatience. He wore a black suit that was too tight in the shoulders, a smug, predatory grin flickering at the corners of his mouth. He kept checking his absurdly large gold watch, as if my final wishes were an inconvenient delay in his busy schedule of spending my money. My sister and her husband were there, too, their expressions somber and genuinely sad. They had always been kind. Walter, my old friend, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a single, thick envelope before him. He adjusted his glasses and looked slowly around the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on Mark's eager face. "We are gathered here today to execute the last will and testament of Arthur Pendleton," he began, his voice calm and authoritative. Arthur, however, chose to do things a bit differently. Instead of a standard legal document, he has left a letter to be read aloud. It has been notarized and is legally binding as his final testament. He wanted his own words to be the last thing you all heard from him. Mark shifted in his chair, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. A letter? How sentimental. How cheap. He just wanted to get to the numbers. Walter cleared his throat and began to read. The voice that filled the room was not Walter's, but mine. Every word, every comma, every pause was exactly as I had written it. To my family, and to those who call themselves my family. If you're hearing this, it means my time has come. I do not want you to mourn a life that was long and, for the most part, very happy. I want you to listen. I've spent my final year taking stock, not just of my assets, but of my life, and I have some accounts that need to be settled. I had instructed Walter to start with the sentimentalities, to lull them into a false sense of security. To my dear sister, Eleanor, and her husband, Tom, you have always shown me kindness and respect. You never judged my simple life, and you always treated me as a brother, not as a burden. In gratitude for your unwavering love, I have instructed that my entire collection of antique carpentry tools, which you always admired, Tom, be given to you. I have also established a fund of $100,000 for each of your grandchildren's education. Use it to give them the head start they deserve. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tom looked utterly stunned. Mark scoffed under his breath, a quiet, derisive sound. $100,000 for some brats and a box of rusty tools? Pathetic. He was expecting millions. The real prize, the house, was surely his. Walter's voice continued, my words flowing into the silent room. Now, I must turn to my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Mark. I could picture Mark leaning forward, his greed a palpable force in the room. This was it, the main event. Sarah, my darling girl, from the moment I first held you, you were the sun in my sky. Everything I did, every long hour I worked, every dollar I saved was for you. I wanted you to have a life without the struggles your mother and I faced. I wanted you to be safe, secure, and happy. I remember teaching you to ride a bicycle in the park, the way you laughed when you finally found your balance. I remember the nights I stayed up helping you with your homework, even when my eyes were heavy with sleep. My love for you has been the one constant in my life. A love, I see now, that I allowed you to take for granted. Sarah began to sob in earnest now, her shoulders shaking. These were not crocodile tears. They were the tears of dawning, horrified realization. And Mark, I remember the day Sarah brought you home. You were charming, handsome, and ambitious. You saw my simple home, my calloused hands, and my mended clothes, and you made a judgment. You decided I was a simple, poor old man, a relic to be tolerated until he was no longer useful. For years, I have been the butt of your jokes, a prop in your performance of superiority. Let me remind you of some of the things you have said, just in case you have forgotten. This was the part one had rehearsed in my mind, over and over. Walter's voice became a steady, relentless cadence, a drumbeat of Mark's own cruelty. On May 12th, at your anniversary dinner, you told your friends, "Arthur is so tight. He squeaks when he walks." You thought I was in the bathroom. I was standing in the hall. On August 2nd, you complained to Sarah that my pauper's diet was stinking up your designer kitchen. You were referring to the vegetable soup I was making. On Christmas Day, after I gave you a hand-knitted sweater, you whispered to Sarah, "Another masterpiece from the nursing home collection." You then used it to clean up a wine spill. And then there was the matter of my wife's music box. You told your friend you'd finally tossed it, that creepy old thing. You said I'd forget about it. I have forgotten nothing, Mark. I have recorded everything. The color drained from Mark's face. His smug expression had vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief and fury. He shot a venomous glare at Sarah, who was now staring at him, her face pale with shock and shame. She hadn't known about the music box. "You see, Mark," my letter went on, "your greatest mistake was confusing frugality with poverty. You saw my patch jacket and failed to see the stock portfolio stitched into the lining. You saw my simple car and failed to see the real estate holdings it was parked in front of. My cheapness, as you so elegantly put it, was the engine of a disciplined, lifelong investment strategy. While you were leasing status symbols, I was buying shares in a small computer company called Apple. While you were buying designer suits, I was buying undeveloped land outside the city. My net worth, which you were so eager to inherit, is not the paltry sum you imagined." Walter paused and picked up a separate, thicker document. At the time of his death, Mr. Pendleton's liquid assets, including stocks, bonds, and real estate holdings, were valued at $7,452,000. A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor and Tom stared, wide-eyed. Sarah looked as if she'd been struck. And Mark's face was a grotesque canvas of warring emotions. Shock, rage, and a desperate, clawing greed that was horrifying to behold. 7 million. The number hung in the air, shimmering like a heat haze. "Yes, 7 million, my letter continued, as if I could hear their thoughts. "A tidy sum. A sum you felt entitled to, Mark. A sum you were willing to trade your decency for. You wanted my house. You wanted my savings. You wanted my signature on a piece of paper that would give you everything. Well, the house. Let's talk about the house." Walter set down the portfolio and picked up another document. "The house you live in was purchased with a down payment of $400,000, provided entirely by Arthur. However, he did not gift you this money. He retained a controlling interest in the property through a private contract which you both signed. A contract which stipulated that upon his death, full ownership would revert to his estate. You were in essence tenants in a home that I owned outright. As of this moment, the house is the property of the estate. It is to be sold immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." "What?" Mark shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "That's impossible. That's theft. He can't do that." Walter simply raised an eyebrow. "He can, and he has. Your signatures are right here. It is perfectly legal." Mark's face was purple with rage. He was sputtering, speechless. All his dreams of luxury, of smugly telling his friends he'd inherited a fortune, were turning to ash in his mouth. "And as for my fortune," the letter concluded, its tone now laced with a final, chilling finality, "the $7 million you were so eager to possess. It will be placed into a charitable trust, managed by my lawyer and my sister. The entire sum will be donated to causes I hold dear. A shelter for the elderly who have been abandoned by their families, a foundation providing financial literacy education to young people, and a national guild for aspiring carpenters and artisans, so that others may have the joy of creating things with their hands. You, Mark, will not see a single cent of it. The room was utterly silent, save for Mark's ragged breathing. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around wildly. But I wasn't finished with him, or with Sarah. I do, however, leave you both one final inheritance. A legacy to remember me by. Walter, please give him the box. Walter reached under the table and produced a small, worn wooden box. It was the first thing I ever carved, a simple, unadorned thing. He slid it across the polished table. It came to a stop in front of Mark and Sarah. With trembling hands, Sarah reached out and opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, shiny penny. My final words echoed in the still room. You always mocked my saving of pennies, Mark. You said they were worthless. Here's one for you. I want you to keep it as a reminder that you had a treasure in your home, a father's love, a family's dignity, a lifetime of devotion, and you valued it at less than this. This penny, and the contempt you have earned, is the entirety of your inheritance. You wanted my money, but you never wanted me. Now, you have neither. There was one last part, a final, painful offering for my daughter. Sarah, my heart breaks for the choice you made. You chose a man's greed over your father's love. You stood by in silence while he disrespected me, while he dismantled my life and my heart. That silence was a betrayal I will take with me to my grave. However, you're still my daughter. The trust contains one final provision. Should you choose to leave this man, should you seek therapy to understand your own weakness, and should you spend 1 year volunteering at the elderly shelter my trust will fund, then after a period of 5 years, the trustees may, at their sole discretion, provide you with a modest living stipend. It is not a reward. It is a lifeline, a chance to build a life of your own, one of value and integrity. The choice, as it always was, is yours. The reading was over. Walter folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was the sound of a life imploding. Mark finally found his voice, a strangled, guttural roar of pure fury. This is a joke. A sick joke. The old bastard was senile. I'll contest this. I'll sue. I'll get every penny. Walter simply looked at him, his expression unreadable. I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Johnson. We have 3 separate psychological evaluations from the last 6 months of Arthur's life, all confirming he was of exceptionally sound mind. We also have sworn affidavits from his neighbors and friends. And we have a video recording of him reading and signing the will. You would lose. And in the process, the details of this letter would become a matter of public record. I imagine your professional reputation would not survive the revelation that you emotionally and financially abused your elderly father-in-law for years before trying to steal his home. But by all means, proceed if you wish. The fight went out of Mark in an instant. The rage collapsed into a pathetic, whimpering defeat. He sank back into his chair, the color of ash, staring at the single penny in the box as if it were a poisonous snake. Sarah was weeping uncontrollably now, a raw, guttural sound of a soul that has finally understood the true cost of its choices. She wasn't crying for the lost money. She was crying for the lost love, for the father she had betrayed, for the final, damning judgment he had passed upon her. My sister, Eleanor, walked over and put a hand on Sarah's shoulder, not in condemnation, but in pity. In the months that followed, everything unfolded just as I had planned. Mark and Sarah were evicted from the house. Their sham marriage, built on a foundation of mutual greed and the expectation of my wealth, crumbled under the weight of reality. Mark, exposed and humiliated, lost his job when the story inevitably leaked. I heard he moved back in with his parents, a bitter, defeated man. Sarah, left with nothing but a penny and a guilty conscience, disappeared for a while. Last I heard from Eleanor, Sarah had filed for divorce and had started volunteering at the elder shelter, just as my will had suggested. It was a fragile, tentative first step on a long road toward redemption. I don't know if she will ever find it, but I had given her a map. My fortune is at work now, building things, helping people, creating value in the world. It is funding scholarships for young woodworkers, providing warm beds for forgotten parents, and teaching the next generation the quiet power of patience and discipline. My true legacy isn't the money. It's the lesson. A lesson that wealth is not what you have, but what you give. It is the dignity you maintain in the face of disrespect. It is the love you offer, even when it is not returned. And it is the quiet, unshakable knowledge that a life of purpose, no matter how simple it may seem to the greedy and the blind, is the most valuable asset of all. They thought I was just a cheap old man. In the end, I was the one who taught them all the true price of everything.